Good morning, everyone. On behalf of your Board of Trustees, we welcome each and every one of you to our meeting this morning. We now are going to have a presentation by a gentleman who first presented this, I think, at a location in Southampton, Maziar Barous, who's a principal with an architectural firm right here in the village. And I think he's here with some colleagues this morning. And I think it was the thought of the board, it might be nice because the thrust of this presentation was kind of why not, could we, maybe. Idealistic overview of East Hampton, what it might be, what it could be. The only difficulty is called financing, all right? But having said that, I'd like to welcome, would you like to just step up and just give a few words and then you can go into the meat of your presentation. I'd like you to preface it, and you're going to drop the screen, right? Or have, okay.
We'd like to drop the screen.
Yeah, we would like, so we're going to go sit in the front.
We'll preface and then.
Okay, just let us know when you're ready and we'll move.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and trustees. My name is Maziar Barous. I'm a principal at, as you said, MB Architecture on Newtown Lane. Used to be by the bowling alley, now here. And I'm here with my associate, Bruce Engel, who is also an architect and a full-time resident. And we have also one of our advisors, Bill Chaliff, who's here. Bill started talking about sustainable architecture, I think 15 years ago. We didn't know what that was, but that's how I got to know him. And we also were in a committee that helped review the comprehensive plan of the town of East Hampton. I think it was like 20 years ago. We also had the benefit of a few other individuals who helped us with the plan. One was Felipe Correa, who's the director of the Harvard urban design program. Really lucky to have him. Evan Harris, local resident who went to high school here. Her kids go to school here. She was our local resident, kind of like bounce back person. Lots of great feedback from her. Barbara Tenney, who's a property owner, gave us feedback. Tom Rule, the director of the East Hampton Housing Authority, sat in a few of our meetings. And Greg Turpan, who's a business owner. A lot of people have asked us, why'd you do this? And it's a really good question, and I really can't quite answer it clearly. I think it started with a Facebook post. Which, like, sometime in the spring, we said, we're going to design, we're going to make some plans for the Village of East Hampton. Really weren't sure exactly what that meant at the time, but that Facebook post locked us in. And we had a couple of meetings with Bill and other advisors, and we just kind of felt like, hey, this is getting serious. Felipe from Boston came down and reviewed some of our early ideas, and it just suddenly started to get serious. And Mayor, you asked me earlier, why didn't you reach out to us? We had no idea this was going to get so detailed. It happened very slowly, but I think in a way, because we didn't, in fact, we weren't hired by either the town or the village, it gave us the opportunity to think freely and openly. And of course, there's so many restrictions and regulations and political issues and funding issues and all that. And one thing we told ourselves is, let's make this real. Let's make it as much as real as possible, which to us meant, can it be done in 5 years? Other than the funding part, can it be done in 5 years? Physically, yes. Every piece of the proposal that we're going to show you today is feasible either immediately or within 5 years, if the political will is there. And funding-wise, we can discuss it also, but we're also architects. This was our extent of responsibility. We need feedback from you all who know this town far better than we do. As I understand it, you have to be a third-generation East Hampton resident to be a Bonnaker. So I've only been 21 years here. I guess I'm I don't know what you call me, a tourist. As a tourist, we made some observations, and so we need feedback from the community, from you all, from other stakeholders, and everyone else. Should you feel that this is something that is worth pursuing, we would be happy to be part of a committee or a team or a group and see where it can go. With that said, I'm going to hand out these basically same pictures that you're going to see on the slides. I'm going to hand them out to you, and then we're going to have the slides.
Okay. I'd just like to add, before we view this wonderful program, you know, I think it's good that we have an individual like Maziar here today to offer some thinking and vision that's outside the box. I would suggest to you that I think it's the intent and design of your elected body, the Board of Trustees. We are very deeply entrenched in the historic significance of the village. That's been one of the mainstays. And as you would say on occasion, if you don't know where you came from, how do you know where you are today so you can travel into the future? But at the same time, I think once in a while to have a fresh view on what if and why not is appropriate. So we're going to move, and you can make your presentation, okay?
I'm just going to speak through this as Bruce sets it up. These are the individuals who, as I said, were our advisors, and then our team. Mayor, one thing you mentioned about history, one thing we all have in common is that we're here because we love the village and we love the town. And really the impetus behind this project has been that. And we decided, I mean, personally, I felt that while some people I know, some friends and so on and so forth have decided to move away, whether to Florida or North Carolina or California, that I prefer not to, would like to stay, and what can we do to make this town fit our needs? So the presentation today is a series of incremental proposals and steps that, as I said, each is doable within like 2 to 5 years. Altogether, they create a more comprehensive kind of vision of strategy for that's looking at the next 20 to 30 years. Let me say right off the bat that the colors don't mean that we're painting the town yellow and pink and blue. The colors just denote new buildings versus old, and when you see the next images, the existing structures and spaces are basically black and white, and what we propose are just in color so you could distinguish between the old and the new. Secondly, another caveat I have to give is, for example, this purple building you see on the left, it says New Museum. It looks like a very modern building. Are we proposing a very modern, boxy building right in the Village of East Hampton? No. This is just a parameter that shows a scale, a size, maybe a width and a height. In the future, if something like this goes forward, architects would be hired, they'd be given these kinds of parameters and programs and told to, for example, design a structure, whether it would be in a historic style or traditional or modern or whatnot, eclectic, within those general parameters. So as we know, the comprehensive plan for the village was done in 2001. The planners, as suggested in their at the end of their comprehensive plan summary, they suggest that in 10 years the plan should be revisited, and that essentially in 20 years it should be undertaken, as it says, completely. I guess that became another reason we decided to take this job on our own, felt that maybe it may align with the village needs. At the same time, East Hampton Town has hired a few planners to do some hamlet studies and look at areas there, like the sand pit and places along the highway to Amagansett, that could be developed in different ways. But the village hasn't, and we decided to take that on. And one thing that happens when the village hires planners and the town is that each entity is only allowed to work within their boundaries, of course, right? So, but because we weren't hired by anyone in particular, we weren't pressured to be limited by a line on paper. We just really tried to look at what's right, how the village can serve the whole community. People in the past have talked about forming a new village up on Fort Pond or elsewhere. We kind of feel that, as you were mentioning, this is a historic village. It's been the center of the town for generations and generations, and the best we can do is to keep it as the central core of the town, but plan it in such a way that it doesn't become this congested place that is very hard to navigate in the summer months. So I hope that this conversation is, I want to repeat this, maybe I said it already, that it's just a catalyst for future conversation. Nothing that you will see here is a final blueprint. The view that you see here is obviously looking south. You're seeing Newtown Lane and 27, which becomes Main Street. And that rectangle that you see is going to be zoomed into in the next slide and all the subsequent slides. So I just wanted to make sure that you orient yourselves, and there's lay people here who may not completely be familiar with these types of views, but if I may just go up here and just point this out, that Newtown and Main, so this is the parking lot back here, the middle school is here, Newtown Lane going all the way to the train station, and Cinderella is here, and all the shops and stores right there. So this is the area that we're going to be focusing in throughout our presentation. And again, that's the zoomed version, and that view will be repeated in the next slides. I just want to point out a few characteristics that we feel are critical in East Hampton, or existing kind of qualities and features. One is, of course, the central commercial district of East Hampton has become more than the past, a luxury kind of outpost for luxury brand outposts. Of course, there are some locally owned shops, but many stores here are owned by corporations that aren't local. And so it's more the commercial center, as you all know. And then developing kind of across the street from the train station where Mary's Marvelous and yoga studios and sandwich shops are, there's almost this other opposite kind of village it's starting to grow. It's a budding zone that maybe is frequented more by year-rounders than by summer people, even though summer visitors possibly may get off the train and walk down Newtown Lane. But we felt that there's these two areas that are already growing. We're just pointing them out. And what happens is that the general visitor will walk down Newtown Lane, they hit the park, and they stop and they go back. So pedestrian traffic is always kept right at that intersection. People just don't generally go walk past that red line unless, like us, you work and live in the village and you want to walk down and get food down the street. So there's that gap in the street fabric which we want to address. Another feature of the village, which is really an amazing and unique quality of East Hampton, is the farmlands, which are less than a quarter mile away from the central core of the village. This doesn't exist in many villages around the country. And right down long lanes, of course, you have the Iacona farms, all the other farms, and we also just want to, the Whitmores is there, the community organic farm, Mahoney Farm, Buckley's and all that. We just felt that that's also another characteristic that has to be pointed out. And our goal, strategic goal of our plan, is to connect these all together and take advantage of them. Let each one complement the other and enhance the other. Another amazing quality of the village, which initially we had kind of pushed back against is the existence of the schools in the village. You have the elementary school and the middle school and the high school. And the three are more or less in walking distance of one another. Students have figured out ways to navigate through the streets, and they have their favorite stops and places to go, which is great. Initially, we were wondering if we should just suggest that the schools should be moved out. And of course, that was a wrong idea. A central village has to be diverse and have various programs and activities, and the schools really help that. Our goal was to enhance the connection between the schools rather than diminish it. And one thing, though, that is an issue is that if you see the library and Guildhall as kind of educational facilities that may be used by students, that perhaps they could, like right now, they're probably not so much. Generally, it's a hard thing to do, especially winter months, 1.5 miles from the high school to the library. So it's an issue that we thought we could address in our plan. The Main Street, East Hampton, this is, you probably know when this picture was taken more than, this is what it used to be. And when Guildhall and, library were planned along this street, it worked really well. You could walk along the street, you could cross the street, and now this is Main Street. Main Street is also a highway. As we know, it's Route 27. So there's a kind of a contradiction between the slow, charming qualities of what is a main street and the need for people to just get on the highway and bolt to Montauk and pass right through East Hampton. It's an issue that we feel has to be addressed, and it's one of the main issues that we face every summer. Is it a highway or is it a main street? That has to be kind of determined for any future planner to plan accordingly around it. Right now, it's both, and it goes through Guildhall and the library, as I mentioned, which is a problem. And John Foster, who saw our last presentation, reminded us that Main Street is a historic Main Street. It's one of the only main streets of its quality and with its history. So what can we do to keep Main Street and yet divert the congestion from it? And of course, Main Street goes right through the village. This highway also goes through the village, and that becomes also an issue that no amount of traffic police or traffic signage or temporary kinds of remedies will resolve this issue. It will get worse, as it has for the past 20 years. It's just going to continue to get worse every year. What do we do about that? So that's just the general setup for our project. And now I just want to point out 4 places that we call places of opportunity. One we feel is the oil and gas distribution and storage center that's right behind 66 Newtown Lane. There's 2 businesses here that we're proposing to do something about. And one is RBS and one is Skank. And I just want to say that these are businesses that we rely on a daily basis. They're community assets. We can't live without them. My own business deals with RBS almost on a daily basis. So when we suggest that these 2 businesses could possibly be relocated, we're not talking about any kind of forced or eminent domain, anything like that. We feel that maybe even they would feel that it's incredibly inconvenient for them to navigate their trucks in and out of their parking lots in August. That perhaps, given the chance, they would say, if the town and village can work with us, maybe we can find a better place for us to move to. And so this is one of them, and there's a parking and stone yard at the end of Railroad Avenue. I don't even know if most of you even know where that is. I had to drive through there last month because in the 21 years I've been here, I really didn't know what was in there. So a few months ago, I went in and drove around it just to get a sense of what that is. So it's kind of underutilized. There's single-family homes between Muchmore Lane and the park, which are great, and I hope the residents who are in it enjoy tremendously. We are making a suggestion about what they could do, what they could potentially do with their homes on a very voluntary basis. And then there's the cinder block building behind Par East that I'm sure no one knows what happens there, right? Basically nothing as far as I've known, 2 decades here, and it's just sitting there vacant, so we feel it's a great potential for something going on, and we talked about the lumberyard. So all in all, our project that Bruce is now going to go through will show various components of the village that we basically think that we could enhance in these small proposals. There's 5 sections to these proposals. If it gets long or tedious, please stop us. We'll move quickly through it. We've spent a lot of time on these drawings, and maybe we might get a little too detailed right now, which we don't need to be. So by all means, let us know if you feel like it's getting... And Bruce is going to continue.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor and trustees, for having us. It's exciting to be here to share these ideas with you. Yes, as Mazir mentioned, I'll now kind of go through the thoughts and ideas that we worked on this summer. A lot of the ideas that kind of kept on coming up and were issues that were raised, either living here for a long time and just, being in the community and talking and so forth, or kind of just, environmental issues, water quality issues that we all hold dear and understand the importance of, transportation or town vibrancy issues, and thirdly, housing issues. So we hope that in some broad sense, a lot of the ideas and proposals kind of fit into some of those categories. So one, as Maziar mentioned, was this great potential of all this contiguous farmland really right at the edge of the town. And so we thought, what if we really kind of make a nod towards the history of the place as an agrarian society culture, and bring that back into the town and have it more part of the village center and part of the experience. I think a lot of people who visit don't even realize that there's so many acres of farm right there. So one of our first moves was kind of bringing that farm, extending it in through some of that empty parking area and underutilized lots, potentially along the railroad, all the way to the tip where Newtown Lane and Railroad Avenue meet, and kind of accenting it with a new windmill, kind of a nod to the older windmills. And you can imagine that potentially with some introduction of greenhouses, there could be a year-round farming culture here that could support year-round local growing, and also feed into a lot of the restaurants and bars that exist just across the railroad tracks between Gingerbread Lane and Railroad Avenue, some kind of farm-to-table restaurants to help support the local business. Across from that, kind of another triangle where the middle school sits, we started to imagine a place that could become an educational hub, a place for both to support students and members of the community, artists, artisans, and so forth. And we kind of dubbed this the cultural, educational, technology triangle. And zooming in here, you can see a technology lab potentially where students could work, artisans, artists, kind of building upon the heritage of the artist culture out here, could kind of come and share ideas, potentially a new library or an extension of the library that's more centrally located right next to the school and close to the other schools, and a Guildhall annex, something that could also, rather than kind of going to a show at Guildhall, getting out of your car, driving, crossing the kind of dangerous dark area along the highway, and then maybe getting in your car coming back to town, or deciding it's time to just go home, you're already in the village center and can maybe go to a show or an exhibit, and then step out and enjoy the other boutiques, restaurants, cafes, stores, etc. To support some of this new activity, You'll notice along the railroad track the idea of a half sunken, half above ground parking area. Along the railroad tracks that we thought was a little bit of no man's land, and with an additional access point along the railroad tracks off of Newtown Lane at that intersection of Railroad Avenue to relieve a little bit of potential congestion along Newtown Lane. Moving now back over to the underdeveloped site near the farmland. This kind of goes into the second point or expands upon the environmental issues. We feel that none of the proposal thus far or any of the proposal that you'll continue to see is possible without addressing some of the waste issues and the current setup of individual septic tanks. So we are proposing some kind of combined waste treatment center. This ring is just kind of diagrammatic, but really would encompass whichever part or extent of the village that would be feasible and necessary. Just a brief view here of basically what it looks like now under every shop property or business or home, that every single one has its own septic and often outdated and is dumping toxins right into our aquifer. The aquifer being very close below the ground in the particular area of the village, as Hook Pond and 3 Mile Harbor used to be actually connected with running water. So we feel that eventually all the hamlets at some point in the village, some point in the future down the road, will need some kind of waste treatment, and we thought that the village would be a great way to lead and be a model in this development. And we're not talking about a smelly plant, we're talking about a piece of architecture and agricultural component that is dubbed or called a living machine that basically uses the process, like kind of recreates the natural process of how the environment breaks down waste and toxins naturally. And it's another reason why we try to place it near the farm, that there are byproducts from that process that are nutrient rich and could potentially tie into the agricultural systems there. Now we'll move back to kind of what's now currently the village center, as Mazir pointed out, and talk about the potential of Herrick Park and the parking lot. Right now it feels like the parking lot's a little bit that back of house to Main Street and the corner of Newtown Lane. And Herrick Park is a beautiful park, but often it seems like underutilized. I almost every day park at the long-term parking and walk to work on Newtown Lane, and off-season it's pretty empty, desolate, and even on high season you see a few things happening, but we feel like potentially there's more potential there for it, and especially having grown up in Amagansett and the nature of how Amagansett Square has evolved with all the shops and activities and people hanging out with their dogs and kids, or Montauk where you have a lot of art fairs or concerts. We thought, hey, what if potentially perhaps Herrick Park and this parking lot area could become a kind of new East Hampton Village Square. So here you'll see at the long-term parking, covering that parking with solar canopies and connecting Gingerbread Lane through the long-term parking towards Main Street with a both pedestrian and also vehicular traffic that would run potentially one way off Main Street towards the long-term parking to help alleviate some of the traffic off Newtown Lane and help kind of create a ring of circulation around the village. And this solar canopy would then run along the playing fields and tie into the existing supermarket and kind of create an edge or a boundary for things to happen. Maybe a tailgate part where people could, park their cars, tailgate, watch the local high school game, play baseball, etc. Potentially the town square / parking, which we're hoping with the advent of the driverless car in the future, parking becomes maybe less and less of a need, where your driverless car can drop you off. You can do whatever you would like to do, shopping, playing, etc. Your car comes and picks you up. So maybe over time, the parking becomes more of a square where pop-up shops can pop up, produce from the farm that's now kind of in the town, in the village center, art fairs, etc. So I'm going to just zoom in a little further. And you notice we have a tailgate park, like with playing fields, and then what we kind of dubbed a people park. Sometimes, because I park and I sometimes bring my dog to work, I often backtrack around the park because of the signs that say no dogs allowed. So maybe there's a place for people, dogs, kids to hang out, and some kind of subtle division between the two. And you could have things like evening movies that could be sponsored by that annex from Guildhall, or art fairs, and games during the days. And there you can see in the parking and maybe a new kind of paving strategy that makes it feel more like a plaza rather than a parking lot. And over time, that could evolve into a kind of a nice place for pedestrians. And this is a view looking from the current parking lot towards the long-term parking with that solar canopy and a kind of tailgate park. Now we'll move to the train station area, which in this vision of kind of growing the village away from, not away from, but like extending it down Newtown Lane and Gingerbread Lane, the train station really is almost the physical center. And for a lot of people who come, it is the arrival point in the village. And you kind of arrive, and right across the street is a lumber yard. And as Maziar said, we love the guys at RBS. We deal with them all the time, but also having sat in and listened to a lot of the Hamlet studies, there are also proposals being floated for some of this light industrial use, maybe moving to other light industrial areas like the sand lots and so forth. So just as a hypothesis, as a hypothetical, we said, what if you arrive at the train station and rather than a lumberyard greeting you, you have a kind of new kind of hub for the town, a secondary hub, if you would, and to kind of build upon the YMCA that's there, and is also strategically located like directly in the middle of the triangle created between the three schools, the elementary, middle, and high school. A place where kids could maybe go after school, do activities, where parents could come to a potentially new post office and drugstore location, rather than kind of getting in and out of the car and finding parking. It could be a place where you could get your kids, get your mail, fill your prescription, kind of all in one place. It could also be a place where you come off the train station and there's like a visitor center greeting you and some other multi-use activities. And this is to just zoom in and pull up the roof on this new block. I grew up remembering, as a kid going to the bowling alley as kind of a great activity for rainy days with the family, or when I was older, meeting a friend after work for playing billiards or bowling. And I don't know, as I now work in the town, in the village, I feel like there's less opportunities for things like that. And bringing something like that back, like the bowling alley or indoor recreation, maybe roller rink, billiards, etc., could be a place that could also just help support the restaurant across the street or the cafe down the block. And so you can just see here, these are some of the things that could happen, just ideas. The last point, the housing issue. I grew up out here, moved away, moved back, had a really tough time finding a place that was affordable to live. And so something that's kind of smaller, more like less expensive, located near the village was a struggle, and kind of came to the forefront of a lot of ideas. So we wanted to look at what it would mean to bring some more inexpensive housing in the village center, and the importance of it being within the village center, that housing populates then the village, that then kind of supports a diversity of businesses and shops and things, and kind of creates a certain kind of vibrancy. So one thing we did as an exercise was look at what we thought is a great year-round functioning community of Sag Harbor. And this on the left is a map of Sag Harbor, this being Main Street, right here with the pier, and specifically this area, Rector Street area, which has a really nice feel, a really nice walkable feel, a lot of very small homes and shops kind of densely knit together. And as an exercise, we modeled those different typologies and sizes, which you can see are all those kind of pink cubes, and said, well, what if we kind of, as an exercise, put those in amongst the streets, you know, around Mary's Marvelous and Muchmore Lane and the long-term parking, and those could be accessory apartments and help kind of densify the living and housing opportunities within the village. And we looked at it not just there, but also you'll see on the left, north of the Schneck parking lot area, where I once did actually look at apartments to rent, and you know, densifying potentially that area too. And then on the opposite side, over by the farm, a potential housing apartments that could afford inexpensive housing, and also help supplement the housing needs for the influx of workers that come every season. And because a lot of those seasonal workers are carless to begin with, if you kind of house them within the village, they can remain carless and not add to the traffic and parking pressures of the village. And they could, you know, walk to and from their places of work and be in the village to then also frequent and use the shops and bars and restaurants that the village has to offer. And the last thing that Mazir also mentioned in as part of the presentation were some of these gaps in the urban fabric, and really filling those gaps really helps create a nice coherent experience for a resident or a visitor. So in these kind of light pink boxes we place through along Newtown Lane, or along now connected Railroad Avenue and Toilsome Lane, or along Gingerbread Lane that connects with Main Street, or behind the Schneck parking, just kind of infilling opportunities so that as a pedestrian or on your bike, it's easy to just walk down and amongst the streets, and kind of as you make turns, there's always a new bar, cafe, small shop to greet you. So these were some of the ideas that we worked through in a very compressed, short summer months. And thank you again so much for taking the time to listen. And Mazir will just give a brief conclusion.
The final comment that I'll make is that if there's one thing to take away, is that because we can't move Main Street, don't want to move Main Street, because we don't want to move the village, our general strategy is let's develop along Newtown Lane towards a train station. So it doesn't matter what types of buildings, what programs. These are just a series of suggestions that we thought would work, but it'd be up to the community to come up with that. But the concept being that we have to move down Newtown Lane and develop it that way, and emphasize and allow the kinds of businesses that are flourishing there now to continue to flourish, for the village to become habitable, or continue to be habitable. Thank you so much for having us. Really appreciate it. We're here if you have any questions, and you can always give us feedback also later on if you feel. Thank you.
I'd just like to make one or two comments regarding your presentation, Mazier, and with your associates, and then I would open it up if any of my colleagues would like to add to that. First of all, I compliment you for the time, energy, and effort that you put into this kind of visual vision of the future for our village. And, you know, sometimes you have to look at others and listen to other philosophies and potentialities to meld that together with where we are today to see if we can even maybe make it a little bit better, an exclamation point at the end of the sentence. Some of the things I would just add for your knowledge, in recent months, as far as Newtown Lane is concerned, the village, working with the town under the guise of the CPF funding, was able to purchase property that is contiguous with Herrick Park. We think that's paramount. That's very important because it's an extension of our green space. I mean, look at Prospect Park in Brooklyn, look at Central Park in New York City. We think that's extremely important to the quality of life here in the village. At the same time, recognizing increased retail commercial activity on Newtown Lane, the village likewise recently purchased a house which is on Osborne Lane just after the historic secondary home of village government. That will be raised. The fire department's going to have an exercise there. They're going to burn the building, controlled burn, and we anticipate 20-plus new parking spaces, which is pocket parking, which is critical. So we're trying to do our job to recognize the changing landscape on Newtown Lane. But what you have offered here this morning certainly gives us additional food for thought. More and more people are coming here and deciding they like what they see, and they're opting to purchase a home or create a residence within the town of East Hampton and the village. At the same time, it's becoming more and more difficult for a first-time homeowner to purchase a home in the village. Every time you folks hear of one of these larger megabuck sales within the footprint of the village, that shunts out that first-time homeowner that is entry-level and would like to take advantage of having a home here. So it's the economic of scale is a financial element to this, and some of this is beyond our control. But again, multifaceted. You talk about septic systems. There's a mechanism in place now through the CPF funding. 20% of that money can be used for water quality initiatives. I would share that many of you may not know, but your Board of Trustees, the village is in parallel and in sync with what the town is attempting to do on water quality, specifically Town Pond, Hook Pond. That's our baby. Georgica Pond, that's a part of ownership by both the town and the village. They're taking the lead there with the lead agency on these two other locations, Town and Hook Pond. There's even been discussion with respect to, at the commercial core location, a scavenger waste plant. Deeply expensive, but we've got, for example, there's one or two establishments on Main Street. And how many times do you see Quackenbush or some of these other, septic vehicles pumping out the cesspools? A couple of times a week. So we are cognizant of these issues. But more importantly, the fact that you gentlemen took the time to put this product together, I think I'm personally in awe, and I think my colleagues are as well. What I would like to do, and once again, I'd offer my colleagues to offer any thought they may have, is to at least let this be a beginning of a dialogue. I think, you got to take baby steps. Our comprehensive plan, yes, is 20-some-odd years old. In between the inception of our comprehensive plan back around 2001, 2002, we initiated a commercial district study. That mechanism is in place. So that's something that's adjunct to work in parallel. And likewise, we have what is known as our Planning and Zoning Committee. The zoning code, our planning code that's in the village code, these are fluid mechanisms, ladies and gentlemen. They're alive, well, and kicking. And on occasion, the Planning and Zoning Committee will cull a particular change that may be offered by members of our planning department or our planning director. code enforcement, building inspection. It's constant, it's constantly changing. The challenge we have is to meld together and offer for public consumption some new language in the code that's specific. And that's what we're trying to do. It's not an exact science, and by golly, I think we're all here as members of labor of love trying to administer local government. But it's a challenge, because at the end of the day, this is still America's most beautiful village. I think I've said a lot, and I would offer if any of my colleagues would like to say something, please do. Tiger?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that this presentation made me think about Newtown Lane a little differently. And to the extent that we're thinking about it a little differently, I think you've done a great job in that. Thank you.
Okay. Barbara, you got anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I have so many notes.
Well-
I've been studying this for, how many weeks has it been? It's well marked, as you can see. I mean, I think it's always good to think outside the box, and I think it's given me a lot of things to think about. I'm not sure that village residents should necessarily sacrifice for the town residents, because in some ways, I mean, it actually says the quality of life residents of all of East Hampton Town would benefit from an emphasis on small, specific village improvement projects. To some extent, that's a sacrifice for village residents. I'm not sure we want to go there. And I also feel like you mentioned a new hub for the town. You specifically said a new hub for the town. You know, perhaps a new hub for the town should be considered outside of the village, because I certainly think that we have as much traffic and busyness in the village as we can handle. As a village resident, I don't want to see more in the main part of the village. I like the fact that Guildhall and the library are a little bit out of the village. But you have given us a lot of things to think about, and I don't, you know, I'm not being critical. I think it's great that you're thinking outside the box. It helps us think outside the box too. But, you know, there's a lot to think about here. So, thank you.
I would agree with what's been said already. Thank you very much for your efforts.
I think I'm a little bit in awe of what you have done with a small time, short time, and what you have done to the different areas of the village that we have grown up with. It's given me something to think about, and some of the work that you have done is already on the books that we are thinking about, especially with the waste treatment plant. I mean, and in fact, we were just talking about it the other day, that we have to look into doing something because of the core center and all the cesspools and the sewer systems in the Rudishan parking lot and the Skank parking lot. We're going to have to do something, and we're looking at also having more available housing in the core community, which again is going to put a strain on the sewer system. So that is going to be a major project and a major undertaking and a major financial taking also. But thank you for your work. We will take it into our consideration, and hopefully we can work together.
Okay.
If I may say.
Sure.
I feel like I'm on The Voice, and I'm being. So.
You know, let me just,
Thank you for every comment.
okay.
I really appreciate it.
Let me give you a specific illustration. I think what Barbara was alluding to, and I think is quietly the tenor of everyone here representing village residents, village government. We now have 2 CVS pharmacy locations within the footprint of the Village of East Hampton. CVS is one of the premier pharmaceutical drug locations across the nation. I mean, you know, they're one of the largest. If one blinks, you would say, gee, if there was some good planning, and I know the town is going through the comprehensive planning process now, and I don't want to be the one to say this is what you should do, but to be candid, they've got to, you know, raise the issue as far as coming up with a bona fide location to have an anchor of a supermarket that will take care of the needs of the larger footprint of the village and the town. And ancillary to that, a pharmaceutical, retail drug location, maybe a tailor shop, a shoe shop. This is something that I think, and I'm not a planner, but I think good planning dictates that anchor, and you build on that. Again, we're encumbered with two drugstores within the footprint of the village. Why did they decide that they wanted to be here? Location, location, location. It's right on the main highway. A number of years ago, there was some discussion about a larger footprint of a supermarket capability. In their vision and good faith, at the time, they indicated that they were going to prohibit a certain square footage area, and that precluded some of these supermarkets that wanted to come into the area right on the main highway. Locations were suggested. It didn't work because they needed to be able to sell a variety of products. Well, what the village had to do, to be honest with you, is we turned around because the only other option at that time was the Riverhead building location. We had to offer similar legislation that it's not going to happen in the village. So you see, it's a juggling act. And I'm not saying this to demean our representatives at the town level. They're doing their very best. But again, if you look across the breadth of our population in the town and the village, good planning dictates let's come up with a bona fide location that we can build on that's going to serve the needs. Some of the ancillary subject matter that you bring up on Newton Lane possibly is doable. We'll keep the dialogue going, okay? All right? I think I spoke too much. But anyway, just for the sake of being ecumenical, is there anyone in the audience that would like to make a comment based on what they have? Bill Chaloff. Bill, please step up. And I compliment you for your passion over the years as far as the Eastern Long Island landscape.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I was fortunate having Maziar call me and invite me to participate, help out a little bit. I was very pleased to attend some meetings, and Maziar and I have known each other for about 20 years and worked together on various projects over those years. I'd like to address the concerns that were indicated by the trustees and look back from a very high point, let's say 20,000 feet, and look back in time and understand that there's always been a symbiotic relationship between the villages on the East End and the townships. In fact, you can't have one without the other. The villages exist because of the townships and vice versa. If we go back some 100 years, and we always run into, planners in the region and neighbors turning out in violent opposition to whatever is being posted up on the screen for consideration at any given time, that we like it the way it was, or honestly, they say we like it the way it is, we don't want any changes, and thinking about we like it the way it was. And a lot of these voices are, come from second home community. And just a little footnote, I'd like to point out that on the South Fork today, 2/3 of all the housing stock on the South Fork are second homes, and the year-round community, is overwhelmed by this. And those numbers are very rapidly moving towards 3/4 and higher, and of course the North Fork is following suit, but the customary 10 to 20 years behind the South Fork. If we go back to the original configuration of the region, we were an agrarian and maritime region. But we don't live by bread alone, and the villages were centers of commerce, centers of culture, and centers of affordable housing. The same issues about providing workforce housing that we are burdened by today existed way back when, again, we were a maritime and agricultural community. And we have to resolve this. We can't say that the village, yes, it has concerns within its own parameters, but it really has to relate and respond to the pressures, the historic pressures and the contemporary pressures of existing in a context, in a relationship with the town. There were people who would live in the village, but work in the town. The town was the farmland. The town was access to fishing, the fishing industry. The town isn't self-contained. It historically had a relationship with the village, and the village, again, historically had a relationship with the town. It could not be said, it's not a self-contained unit. These are the historic drivers that shaped the town. They came from outside and they came from within both. And we have to acknowledge that today, and even more so, the pressures from the outside the village are, if unplanned for, and if unforeseen, and if not even acknowledged, that's the step number one, is to acknowledge them, they will overwhelm the village. We can't have the village be the parking lot for the whole town. We can't have the village be the center of many things, services for the whole township. But again, those three historic functions of being the center of culture, being the center of affordable housing, being the center of commerce, those things should be enhanced and elaborated on so that the town can go back to the business, we hope, of regenerating a landscape that will go back, instead of losing acres from agricultural industry out here, which we've done historically ever since I've been out here. It's my 45th year. I know that still makes me a tourist, right? But that's since World War II, the number of acres under the plow have gone down, down, down every single year. That has to reverse. The long-term health of this region is one where we have an interdependence between the villages and the hamlets and the township. And that it also encourages the greatest variety of businesses, people, socioeconomic strata in the population. The health of a community, if we look in the natural world, is always indicated by diversity first. And I've heard echoes of that sentiment and that understanding at this table here this afternoon. I'm very pleased to have heard that. And I think we should not let that go, but elevate. That's the canary in the coal mine. That's the chief indicator is diversity. To the degree that the proposal that you saw today enhances and allows for that to blossom, I think it's a very successful proposal. The mayor just referred to issues about the second CVS and the relationship, again, on a planning level between the town and the village. Well, the very first thing to do, in my book, is to have, since it's now, the issues are larger than the borders of the village, that the village and the town planning boards get together and look at expand the boundaries of focusing on this in terms of a problem. And I think by expanding those boundaries and working together with the township, we're likely to come up with some very good plans that, again, allow for the village to, increase their functionality in terms of housing, culture, affordable housing, culture, and commerce. With respect to increasing the one thing that we all abhor out here, traffic. Again, as Ms. Borsak noted, the village doesn't want to be the dumping ground for solving problems that are outside the village boundaries. But if we handle this with intelligence and care and sensitivity, we can find that the village will be increasingly a pedestrian environment and a slow traffic environment. And we know that Maziar and Bruce raised the issue of what is Main Street. Is it a highway? Or is it a Main Street? Recapture that as a Main Street and look at alternate traffic routes to handle the through traffic or the by traffic. And the way Southampton historically did with County Road 39, for example, that didn't kill the village, that helped the village. And the Sag Harbor, too, is not on a throughway between New York City and Montauk Point. And Sag Harbor, we know, is the most successful village on the East End. Not to say anything bad about the village here, but I think, again, working together with the town would be the very first step. And these political boundaries, as I said in my comments that were printed in response to the first presentation by these gentlemen, this can really happen. And we are not looking to, no one is looking to violate the laws of physics. We can't violate the laws of physics. But boundaries that are lines on maps and boundaries that consist of zoning and other regulations, the creation of well-meaning and intelligent attorneys. I say this because I know Linda. These are up for change. These are up for grabs. We have to, first step, acknowledge the scope and the power of the forces that are driving and calling for changes, and that's the first step. Acknowledge them and assign them their true values, and then work together with people who have all interests in seeing this happen, which are people in the town, people in the village, and people who work here but may not live here, and so forth. Anybody who's an interested party. Open the table up, continue a discussion, as the mayor said, but make sure that everybody is allowed to participate. And I think that having even dramatic changes that honor and respect and feature the existing historic beauties of this village would really do everybody well, would help the village, would help the town. There need be no losers here in this game at all. Thank you for your time. All right.
Thank you very much for your comments, Bill. Very timely. You know, when we put our heads on the pillow tonight, we've got a lot of thinking to do with respect to what we heard today, but it's all good. Once again, gentlemen, thank you so very much for being here, okay? We have a few more items. Is there anyone that would like to take a 5-minute break? Maybe let's do that. We'll come back in 5 minutes, 12:30, okay? If anybody would like to take advantage